this Monday, the New York Post, a fixture of the New York media scene, effectively a tabloid, but still newsy enough to kind of have plausible deniability, launched a West
Questionable,
Coast brand.
questionable.
Yeah. Somebody asked me, they're like, "Is it news or a tabloid?" I was like, It's not an either or." So it's a big splashy effort. I wrote about the marketing campaign behind it, but they've hired dozens of people. I think it's going to be on the run to be, probably a newsroom of over 100 plus when it's all fully said and done. But
Wow.
they're doing an 8-week rollout with marketing elements in out of home, big billboards in San Francisco and LA. They're working with this food truck, the Yeasty Boys, which is this bagel shop, to sort of
Mhm.
wrap all the trucks and give away free items with one of them. And they're doing sort of a coffee sleeve promotion at 80 coffee shops across the city, and then digital and social campaigns. In addition, and we talked about this a little bit up top with the Southwest element. We'll get into it more later, but they're trying to straddle this delicate tension of it's the New York Post brand that is pretty iconic with the typography and the sort of conservative tabloidy sensibility, but they're trying to tailor it for Californians. And so naturally you want to change it a little bit, but you want to import that brand identity, but customize it to make it local a little bit. It felt like a lot of the copy was written by New Yorkers thinking about what Californians might care about, kind of thing, rather than
I
like
mean, isn't that the
actually
New York
getting
Times as
Californians
well?
involved. I mean, for sure, right? Like that's the whole like what do you call it? Sort of parachuting into a place or
Yeah.
whatever. Like so, I mean, at least kudos to them. They're going to have people on the ground. They're going to build it out from there. It might have been the marketing campaign that was a little bit misguided. Because I spoke with some Californian agency folks and they were like, this isn't how Californians talk. Um,
Yeah.
but it's, it's interesting because I think from a media perspective, there is an interesting trend that this is kind of hoping to act on, which is the sort of increasingly rightward shift, not only that we've seen in the country over the last several years, but specifically that we've seen in California, and even more specifically that we've seen in Silicon Valley, right? And so the New York Post would tell you that either their first or their second largest share of audience lives in California. So they're saying there's an unmet need basically for conservative, opinionated reporting. That's what they're going in to fill. It'll be an interesting litmus test to see how popular the product is, whether there really is this kind of conservative leaning or it's just something that Californians read after they've read their standard news and they want like a diversion or whatever the case may be. Um, but they're basically hoping to tap into this conservative inclination, really grow their audience, and in particular, maybe have some sway in San Francisco. It's an interesting marketing story too, frankly. One source said this kind of didn't feel like when you launch a newsroom somewhere, you want there to be some sort of homegrown affinity. Like, we're from here. We care about this. This is our backyard kind of thing. Whereas the New York Post kind of came in really with a bit of a middle finger and said, Californian, you guys have been doing things wrong. Your government is, upside down. You people aren't saying what they mean. They're hypocrites. We're going to tell the truth kind of thing. And it's really like, is this a message? I mean, to your point about like Mamdani and like making things nice, like, is this a message that inspires affinity? It feels more like a broadside, like you kind of come in and you antagonize everybody, and maybe that message resonates with like a certain subgroup, but it doesn't feel like a big tint. You know what I mean? It feels like they're going into enemy territory and they know it. Um, so seeing how it's received will be really fascinating, and then seeing how this specific 8-week marketing campaign, which is the biggest they've done in recent history is what they're saying, at least a decade. So there's a lot riding on it, but it's owned by News Corp. It's a well-resourced institution, unlike a lot of other media companies nowadays that are kind of, spinning in death cycles. You have News Corp companies actively growing, generating more revenue, growing subscribers, growing audience. And I think this is a huge play for the New York Post to really set up camp in California, which I don't need to tell you, is the biggest audience there is in America. So if they can make this work, it could have pretty sizable ramifications for the sort of national media ecosystem.
Yeah, yeah. Two things that were interesting that you said was them saying that, the California audience is like, one of the largest, if not the largest. And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, we have the biggest population, right? There's a lot of
Yeah.
Republicans and right wing folks that live here. Up until the 1980s, I mean, it was a Republican state, right? Like Reagan came from here. Nixon also came from here. So we have, Republican governors slash, presidents that, came from California. And then the other thing, I question whether, like the readership wants a California post like you as like the New York Post writing for California and like our politics, or if people are just interested in learning about New York politics and what's happening politically on in New York. So I will be curious to see like how, if the readership grows and how popular it gets, whether it does become more of a cultural footprint here given those two things. But I assume that they've done some research into the readership here of like who wants that, or frankly maybe they're willing to lose money in California in order to kind of build up a mouthpiece loud enough to start shifting politics in the way that they want things to be shifted, right? Like maybe they're making enough with, the New York Post and then all the other like news corp sources that they're willing to lose money in California in order to kind of grow that like cultural and political mouthpiece that like would be so much more important and effective for them. Kind of like we've seen with Twitter, right? Where it's like we saw Twitter switch hands and now it's become more of a right-wing platform where those are like the voices that get raised, the whole bots, situation. So that's a thing that I'll also be curious about. One thing that said about their marketing rollout is that some iconic LA brands have advertised for them, right? Like notably to me was the LA Dodgers welcoming them to LA, right? The LA Dodgers owner is a very big MAGA Trump supporter, so it's not surprising to me that was something that probably came from the top down to tell them, hey, just send like a welcome post to like the California Post or whatever, right? But you did see pushback online from like, people saying like, why are you, becoming a mouthpiece for Rupert Murdoch, News Corp, and all of that when we don't want that in California, right? I did see that like they are reporting more on like Hollywood stories, right? So one of the stories that went viral yesterday was the Josh and Benny Safdie like relationship and like why it broke, right? It turns out there was some like sexual assault that happened on like one of the films that they did. I think it was Good Times with Robert Pattinson. So it kind of like went told the backstory of like, why they're not like directing together anymore, right? For those of us that wondered why, one Safdie brother is doing the Smashing Machine and the other one is doing Marty Supreme, right? So they're kind of starting to do what they did in like New York and also in like the UK, right? With the like celebrity cultural commentary that like, people will pay attention to. They do seem to be approaching it in a way that's gonna be tantalizing to people, which is following celebrity gossip, right? And like what's
Yeah.
happening in LA and Hollywood.
Right, exactly. I mean, they have this franchise Page Six, which here in New York
Hmm.
is like the probably go-to rag for celebrity gossip. And it's like, oh, this is tailor-made for Hollywood. I mean, you have to imagine Page Six is going to get no shortage of material having to do with Hollywood celebrities. So I think that will be a great offering. They're also really touting their sports coverage. The New York Post, I'm not a reader of it for its sports, but apparently has really great coverage of the New York sports scene. You made the point of, do people read the New York Post because they want to see what's going on in New York through like this perspective, or are they thinking to themselves, man, I wish I had something like that here and wrote about,
Okay.
and it's a really good point. Somebody else brought that up. It's like, I think a lot of that viewership is kind of like voyeurism. Like what's going on
Right.
in New York is
Mhm.
refracted through this really weird prism. It goes back to what we were talking about at the very beginning of sort of, expressed behavior versus exhibited behavior. Like
Yeah.
people say one thing and do another. It being the Post, it being News Corp, whatever. It's nice to see a media brand expanding. It's nice to see a media brand taking chances. And Lord knows there really might be a conservative readership in California that feels like it's not being served. And if they do that for them, then more power to him. So we'll see, though. I think it could have some interesting ramifications for what happens to the dominance of the Los Angeles Times, which has been historically kind of like the newspaper of record across California. And what does this mean for the New York Post? And does this open up new opportunities that it didn't have previously now that it has sort of a bureau on both coasts? Just in terms of takeaways, I think there's an interesting brand adaptation story here. How do you take something that's quintessentially of New York and transplant it into California and both preserve that sort of attitude, but also tailor it? We'll see if they've done that well. I think, like I said, the media landscape, the growing conservatism, is this going to feed into that? To your point, could this actually influence politics and local elections as it has here in New York? I think that very much could be the case. And then I think in terms of going back to what we were talking about again with Substack TV, my one criticism really of the rollout has been a real lack of video, lack of short
Mhm.
form video, lack of CTV video, um, which is interesting to me because that says to me that they're either not trying to reach young people or that they don't know how to reach young people. And if it's the latter, that's not good. If it's the former, that's really interesting. But the lack of video, especially after the Mom Donnie conversation we just had, is sort of inexplicable. If news organizations are always trying to reach younger audiences, and without video, they're not going to do that. So it it
Yeah, I
it,
mean,
it
who
has me
reads
believing.
news anymore?
Yeah,
You know, everything's done through like a video or, TikTok. I mean, it's a huge reason why TikTok was bought, right? Is to kind of influence what people are seeing, how they're seeing it. Video podcasts are on the rise as well, right? A lot of people are getting their news from Joe Rogan and from, Theo Vaughn and other like podcasters that are talking about the issues. So I think there is room to kind of have more of those like cultural or like influencing type of voices that don't necessarily lean one way or the other, but want to affect culture in some way. And I think maybe that's a thing here with what you were saying about young people is like, are young people, quick to choose one side or the other, right? We saw that in the 2024 election, more of them voted for Trump, right? But now we're starting to see that their numbers are going back to Democrats. So I don't think it's as cut and dry as it used to be. I guess we'll see in the 2026 elections where the numbers go. But I think as a media play, going to like the biggest market in the country, at least for the right, makes sense, even if they are going to lose money in it.